are not very friendly to women. Yeah, ran through was really the term that stuck with me.
I don't know the term.
Women can't be trusted. Women only want to date men who are, tall, rich, and handsome. And if you're not one of
6'4",
those,
blue eyes, and works in finance.
Yes, actually,
I've also heard of this as like 666. He needs to be 6 feet tall, make 6 figures, and have a six-pack. Which, like, I think is something that men believe women want.
This is pure gold. Hold the line. Hold the freaking line. Welcome to Manosphere Highlights Daily, where we call out feminist foolishness, expose women's hypocrisy, dismantle double standards, and stand up for men. We're living in some interesting times, gentlemen. We're living through the consequences of decades of cultural experiments, and the bill is finally coming due.
We're in a sex recession. Americans are having less sex than ever before, especially Gen Z. The number of young people who say they haven't had sex in the past year has roughly doubled since 2010. And that data has caused a lot of worry.
The record level decline last year is leading to fears there may not be enough children to sustain the next generation.
But when asked what was more important to them than regular sex, many Gen Zers replied,
Gen Z would rather have a good night's sleep than sex.
I've been celibate for 2 years. I've never felt this much peace.
It really opens up like a new level of thinking in your mind.
It means no dating, no romance, nothing for a full year. And I was thinking today, I did sort of have the realization, I was like, oh, I don't know, this actually might be a lifetime thing.
But is there happiness outside of happily ever after?
This is where the conversation we've had in this space for many years has become inevitable. And what's fascinating is that these researchers are now documenting consequences that many men in this space were talking about years ago. And guess what? They won't be called women haters for doing so. Let's get into it.
Phones, Carter, you were talking about Roe v. Wade. I also assume or wonder if Metoo had an impact on young people and how they were thinking about sex. Is that something that's come up in your reporting?
That's something that definitely came up in my reporting and with young people that I've talked to, millennials and Gen Z. I think one of the things that Carter was pointing out very correctly is that the entire social environment shapes how people move about, how they interact with each other, and maybe eventually how they have sex. So first of all, we have to know that Gen Z has come of age in a very anxious time, right? There was COVID and the pandemic. Everybody was stuck at home. Our political climate is frankly insane. And then Me Too happened in 2018, that kind of a formative age for many people in terms of thinking about sex and dating and how to relate to other people. I think for young women, Me Too served as a moment in which they could say, the current sexual climate, our current sexual landscape, maybe actually doesn't feel that great for me. And I feel like I'm allowed to say that publicly. There's like less pressure on me to assent to things, which is, I think, a really good thing. I think for young men, however, they became really frightened, actually. There's one guy I remember interviewing who said that, after Me Too, asking out a colleague in the workplace or hitting on a girl in public was like handing them a loaded shotgun. It was really dangerous and could have consequences for him. And I was kind of like, that seems extreme.
Hold up. Look at that face. Yes. Women have no idea what the male experience was because this witch hunt eclipsed the male perspective. Shout out to the content creators in this space at the time for heavily reporting on this from a male perspective because the manosphere was the only place where men would get a fair shake. And this was a time when Sandman was one of the most watched channels in this space. The manosphere was not mainstream yet, but men going their own way were making a lot of noise.
But I think a lot of actually conscientious young men noted that, Me Too had happened. Women had been made uncomfortable in a number of circumstances that they, hadn't known about and dialed back their own behavior, their own willingness to ask people out, to try and pursue sex on a date, to even try and pursue dating in some situations. And obviously, if you're not talking to potential sex partners, it is far less likely that you will have sex with them.
This is the issue we have in this space. Women had no problems letting the world know what they didn't want and what they didn't like. But they failed to provide a blueprint of a successful dynamic between men and women. This is why men are not scared nor lost. They know exactly what the best way to move is in this particular scenario, and that is to not participate. Doubt means no. The price to pay is too high, and the consequences were constant in the news. You can't blame these men for opting out.
I actually think what I found in my reporting is it's different for the genders, as Christina's talked about. But what I found really interesting is when I talked to young men, and I should say for my book, The Second Coming, I interviewed more than 100 young people under 30. I've also covered gender and sexuality for 10 years now. I found that young men actually weren't all that moved by Me Too. And I think this is partially an age thing, which to Christine's point, she's talking about people being in the workplace. But many of the young people I was interviewing, they did not remember Me Too, which was sort of a dagger to the heart the first time I heard it, because it was so pivotal to me. And there was one young man I remember who, 18 years old, grew up in New York City, had just graduated high school right after we spoke. And he was sort of talking about the ways that young men in his cohort talk about women. And he was using terms like bop and ran through and things that really are not very friendly to women. Yeah, ran through was really the term that stuck with me.
I don't know the term. I don't know the term bop. Is it not appropriate for a New York Times podcast?
It's not family friendly. I don't know. Yeah. No, look it up on Urban Dictionary if you feel so inclined after this.
Let's read the definition, shall we? Janice, read.
A bop is a slang term primarily used to describe a young woman who is perceived as promiscuous or immodest. This perception often arises from having multiple sexual partners or presenting oneself in a revealing manner on social media.
I just can't stop thinking about this. This is another shocker for women when they hear that men actually talk amongst each other and have a completely different idea of them than they think. Why? Because women have no interest in the conversations men have, because it's female validation that matters to women most. This hookup culture women are engaging in is for female validation.
It's not cool to be powerless, right? Mm-hmm. It's cool to be in control. And I think this is why people find the concept of virginity or the concept of being a virgin to be inherently embarrassing, because that is a state you can't change by yourself.
They don't care about their body counts because the sisterhood doesn't care. That's why the manosphere must be toxic. And that's why Mark Manson has to publicly distance himself from it out of fear of being canceled. You think it's a coincidence his second claim was body count doesn't matter?
My next surrounded claim is that a woman's body count doesn't matter.
Yes.
But what was shocking to me is he said this thing. He was like, you're talking about Me Too, and Me Too was about not sexually assaulting women, but it's not necessarily, I didn't understand it as treating women as people. That's not how I understood it. And he kind of drew a line between affording women and girls full humanity and just not sexually assaulting them. Mm-hmm. And I found that very fascinating because it speaks to me that Me Too didn't really do as much as we maybe would have liked it to do, that it didn't actually really change some of these mores as permanently as we might have liked, because people just don't remember.
Damn, told you so. That's the real damage. This was a witch hunt. It was never about bringing men and women together or providing a blueprint so men and women could interact with each other successfully. It only separated us more. Remember how they were dunking on men at the Oscars? Remember how every man in a leadership position could be a potential Weinstein? Remember how Johnny Depp lost his career the moment the accusation went public, years before any court had even weighed in? The Believe All Women slogan. This was extreme stuff that affected the average man that the average woman doesn't care about.
And the thing I will say about young women, I totally agree with Christine that I have found that they have become more anxious. And I think part of that is because for the women who remember Me Too helped them recognize, certainly earlier than I did, that maybe something that happened to them that was wrong was actually a violation, that they should recognize this as sexual assault or sexual harassment, and they deserve to seek redress for that. They deserve to be made whole. But what these women have also found is that we didn't actually really see that many institutional changes after Me Too. We have seen more HR trainings around sexual violence. We have seen some legislation around NDAs. But for institutions like colleges, we haven't actually seen an overhaul of the way that we address sexual violence. The same goes for K through 12 institutions. And so these young women walk around with a greater knowledge of how pervasive sexual violence is, and an understanding that if something happens to them, their institutions are not necessarily set up to help them in that instance. And that is just a culture of fear. It's a miasma of anxiety, and that makes you not want to engage in any of this to begin with.
Hold on. Is that actually the job of an institution? Because a college isn't supposed to be team woman. It also isn't supposed to be team man. Its job is to determine what happened. There's a huge difference between helping someone and investigating a claim fairly. Those aren't the same mission. And that's where this conversation quietly changes without anyone noticing. Metoo changed the culture. Companies changed. HR changed. The public conversation changed. Men changed their behavior. Women changed their expectations. Dating changed. Workplaces changed. So if all of that happened, what exactly is this institutional overhaul we're still waiting for? That's the question nobody asks, because overhaul sounds good. But overhaul into what? Lower standards of evidence? Different investigative procedures? Automatic belief? More administrators? More mandatory training? What specifically is missing? Nobody ever defines it. That's because the conversation rarely reaches a measurable endpoint. It keeps asking for more change without explaining what success actually looks like. And in the meantime, what grows most isn't clarity, it's anxiety, it's mistrust, it's men and women becoming more suspicious of each other while the goalposts keep moving.
I think that's a great point, actually. And I think you're right to point out this distinction between kind of millennials and older Gen Z who might have had their sort of sexual memory working when Me Too happened, and a younger generation who did not. So one of the things that I've also noticed as a sort of age and gender split is in a post-Me Too environment where young women, I think, are more okay with talking about negative experiences. They share those, especially on TikTok and Instagram. A lot of women are more open to making reels about, I had this bad experience with a man, or I went on this date and it was awful and here's why. And there is actually just a lot more content about how men can be dangerous or predatory, or sort of in social media kind of dating advice parlance, narcissists or liars or something. And so it makes men feel both scarier and sort of less, I think, responsive to female concerns. And there's a whole dialogue that has grown that is kind of negative around dating men. In fact, it's a term that I think the New York Times has published a number of pieces on, heteropessimism, right? This idea that for a woman trying to date a man is kind of a hopeless enterprise. And, you might in fact wish that you were a lesbian or not interested in men at all, but alas, you are. And then on the male side of the equation, if women are seeing feeds that are full of kind of negative content about the opposite sex and sort of descriptions of, unfortunate and scary occurrences that then shape their idea of dating, men are getting dating advice that is also really negative about women, like all women are on OnlyFans, women can't be trusted, women only want to date men who are, tall, rich, and handsome. And if you're not one of
6'4",
those,
blue eyes, and works in finance.
Yes, actually.
I've also heard of this as like 666. He needs to be 6 feet tall, make six figures, and have a six pack, which I think is something that men believe women want.
Yeah. And when men are, told this by sort of their dating advisors, like the Fresh and Fit podcast or Andrew Tate types, or even, Joe Rogan occasionally trades in this sort of discourse, they begin to feel really negatively towards women. And so, yeah, they aren't really interested in being with each other in the same way.
You see, this is where she lost me. Women's dating preferences are documented. Stating facts doesn't make you a misogynist. That's why you no longer listen to what women say, but watch their actions. This is one of the cultural consequences of #MeToo that almost nobody talks about. Young women became much more comfortable publicly sharing negative experiences with men. An entire online ecosystem where negative stories about men spread faster, receive more validation, and shape how the next generation approaches dating before they even have much experience of their own. Did you hear any specific names of female influencers or content creators when she was talking about this? No, you didn't. Have you ever heard women say they'd rather be alone with a bear than with a man? You probably have. It was everywhere for a while. Now ask yourself, did you ever see mainstream media seriously push back on that message? Call it what it would be called if the sexes were flipped. Mostly not. Outlets amplified it, explained it, wrote sympathetic pieces about why it made sense. That's the double standard in practice, not just in theory.
I think the rise of loneliness influencers speaks to another trend about Gen Z and millennial dating. One thing that has become clear to millennials and Gen Z is, in a post-sexual revolution, feminist inflected, if not feminist, winning world, is that women...
Definitely not feminist winning. That's agree.
Yeah.
I don't think the White House would identify as particularly feminist.
No. But, a culture in which women are able to exist by themselves, where women have jobs, where women are going to college and graduate school at higher rates than men, where in a lot of major cities, women are earning more than their male counterparts. You don't have to get married or be in a relationship to make a life for yourself. And it's felt as a liberating thing, at least for younger women, millennials and Gen Z, and perhaps also for, these older married women who maybe didn't feel like they had as much choice in the matter, and so ended up with a husband and kids and a house and all of this stuff to deal with as a way to feel like they were part of and accepted by society. So the sort of romanticization of loneliness, I think, also speaks to a kind of romanticization of the idea that women can do it by themselves, that they don't have to be in a relationship to be happy. They don't have to have a boyfriend to be able to afford their, frankly, kind of alarmingly clean apartments.
I think you and I are seeing the same one.
This is feminism winning, gentlemen. This is what they asked for. Workforce access, autonomy in marriage, divorce, children, education. To make a long story short, they wanted it all. And they got it. But look at what's actually happening once they have it. A booming genre of content built entirely around presenting yourself as fulfilled, alone, and totally fine with it. That's not what winning looks like. That's what performing winning looks like. And even Carter admits she doesn't buy it. Her own words.
And it's always very curious to me. It's like, how much can I really believe that these people actually agree with the concept of loneliness? How much of these people are trying to change their circumstance?
That's why you watch what people do, not what they say they want. And what we're watching right now is a lot of talk about independence next to a culture that has to constantly perform how independent it is.
I actually have had something of this actual conversation with a young person before, which is about, I think it was a year or two ago now. I was following around a group of young people who were at the Jersey Shore, and they were preaching the value of chastity, which is obviously a big sell to be making at the Jersey Shore.
Jersey Shore.
Yeah, I was like, I've got to go report on this. This is so fascinating to me. But I was talking to one of the young men, and he was not interested in having sex until marriage for religious reasons, which, I think that is great. I think that people should obviously have sex according to their values. But what was fascinating to me is he wasn't even dating. And he was saying that was one of the things he was thinking about, was that if you aren't dating for marriage, you're dating for heartbreak. And that made me really sad, because I do feel like heartbreak is such a, as you're pointing out, Nadja, formative experience. When I have had my heart broken, I have learned so much about resilience. I have learned so much about anger. I have learned so much about art. I suddenly understood what all those Taylor Swift songs were about. And I feel like it turned me into the person I am today, to have gone through heartbreak and to be able to feel that depth of feeling is, I think, a really special experience that I don't want people to get their heart broken, but when it happens, it can be so enriching to your life. And I do think that young people are interested in more friction than they're currently getting. I do actually think that there is a yearning for community. I don't think we have to be making the argument that I was making to that young man. I think that there is an acknowledgement and an acceptance that friction is good for us. It's better for us.
Heartbreak is not the problem. Heartbreak in this current climate is the problem. This is what our video about removing the reward was all about. It was never about women being prizes or trophies. It's about a man growing towards something and wanting the woman he loves to witness it. The hero does not climb the mountain because he is owed the treasure. He climbs because the treasure gives meaning to the climb. You removed the destination from the map. You took away the reward for the journey. You told a generation of boys that becoming their best selves earns them nothing. And then you called them toxic for not showing up. How can I sit here and tell men to keep getting their hearts broken for nothing?
And to what you were saying, Nadia, about, the idea that you can get your needs for intimacy met through AI or on OnlyFans. The question that was running through my head was like, can you really? Is that sort of real intimacy? And I think the thing with AI companions and OnlyFans in particular, and this is my argument for friction, right, is that they're meant to make you happy. They don't fight you. They don't push back. Like your AI flatters you and does what you want. It doesn't get mad at you or tell you off or say that it's fine, but it's not fine. And then you have to kind of figure out what's going on. But those are the things that you have to learn to be in relationship with real human beings. It's how we learn how to move through the world with others. And without friction, you just don't learn that. And I think that's actually a pretty scary prospect.
I want to keep pushing back just because I'm curious, but why? Why? If it's enough for people, if it could be enough for people, then why do they really need to learn about all of the ways you can be hurt and unfulfilled by other people?
The argument for friction is the argument for life. It's the argument for being out in the world, for experiencing anything. And I understand that it's scary and not always fun and feels rough, frankly, to make a pun using the word friction. But I do think people understand the inherent value of difficulty. And I think people understand that when I accomplish something that scared me or made me hurt or was just beyond what I thought I was capable of, they feel good.
Friction, that's the word she landed on. Not consequences, not accountability. Friction. Funny thing about friction, gentlemen, you can't have it both ways. You can't build a culture that punishes men for showing up and then get surprised when they stop showing up. You can't remove the reward and still expect men to climb. 2 women just said the quiet part out loud in the New York Times without meaning to. We already knew. Now you have the receipts. Listen to all, follow none.
Management, we working. Protect yourself at all times. This video has officially been highlighted.